The sound of the wind. The wind whistled gently through the pine trees as Emily Carson adjusted the strap of her canvas backpack and took another step along the winding trail. The sun was beginning its slow descent beyond the Appalachian Ridge, spilling golden hues across the sky. She had been walking for over an hour now, driven not by a destination, but by a need to escape. The pain of the past months weighed heavily on her chest. Her grandmother's sudden passing, the endless legal paperwork, and the haunting silence of her now empty apartment in Nashville. She had always felt closer to her grandmother than anyone else. Nana Rose, as she called her, had raised Emily like a daughter after her parents died in a car accident when she was 7. Nana's stories of childhood in the countryside, of running barefoot through wild meadows and befriending animals like they were family, had filled Emily's early years with wonder. But Emily had never asked where those stories took place. She assumed they were just tales, a child's fantasy retold by an aging woman, seeking to remember a simpler time. But grief has a strange way of stirring the soul. After the funeral, Emily felt an inexplicable urge to leave the city and return to nature, to walk in places untouched by steel and glass, where she could feel close to the woman who had meant everything to her. So here she was, alone on a dirt path that seemed to wind forever to the Tennessee woods. As she paused to drink from her bottle, a distant rustling drew her attention. At first, she thought it was the wind again, or perhaps a deer, but the sound grew louder, rhythmic, and strong. Hoofbeats, slow but deliberate. She turned her head just in time to see a blur of muscle and grace, a wild Mustang, emerging from between the trees. Emily froze, stunned. She had seen horses before, but never like this. Its coat was a striking silver gray, almost shimmering under the dying light. Its black mane whipped in the wind, eyes fixed on her with unsettling intensity. The Mustang didn't gallop away. Instead, it stood still as if waiting. Heart pounding, Emily lowered herself slowly, trying not to spook it. "Hey there," she whispered. "You're a long way from a ranch, aren't you?" The horse neighed softly, then turned its head and trotted a few paces into the trees before pausing and looking back. It did this again and again, stop, look, as though it wanted her to follow. "This is crazy," Emily muttered. But something about the horse's behavior, its calmness, made her feel oddly at peace. Her feet moved before her mind fully agreed, and soon she was following the animal off the trail and into the forest. The path grew denser, branches scratching at her sleeves, the ground softer beneath her boots. Still, the Mustang led her on, always staying just a few steps ahead, never out of sight. The forest thickened, sunlight now just a faint whisper through the canopy. Emily began to wonder if she'd made a mistake, stepping off the path, trusting a wild animal. But then she saw it, through a break in the trees, the silhouette of a structure. As she stepped into a clearing, the full image came into view, a crumbling farmhouse, its roof half cave-in, walls sagging with age and time. Vines crept up its sides like fingers trying to hold on to memories. The wooden steps groaned under the weight of the wind, and one of the front windows hung broken like an open eye. The Mustang stopped at the edge of the clearing, breathing heavily but calm. It stared at her, then bowed its head low, almost in reverence. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The sight sparked something, a distant memory. A story Nana Rose once told about a house surrounded by trees so thick they whispered your secrets, and about a white foal she used to feed apples to. Emily's legs trembled as she approached the porch. Could this really be it? Could this ruin be the home of Nana's childhood? She placed one foot on the creaking step and felt the world shift. Inside, the air was musty with time. Dust floated like tiny ghosts through shafts of golden light. Furniture lay overturned, a wooden chair broken in a corner, curtains shredded by years of wind and weather. Cobwebs veiled the corners like drapes, and an old grandfather clock stood silent, its hands frozen at 3:14. She wandered slowly, reverently, like walking through a dream. There were still remnants of life here. A porcelain teacup on the floor, cracked but whole, a child's shoe half buried under leaves that had blown into a shattered window. A faded painting of a field of wildflowers hung askew above a long-dead fireplace. In the far room, the floorboards creaked under her steps. A bookshelf stood against the wall, its contents mostly rotted or fallen. One book, however, remained untouched, thicker than the rest, wrapped in worn leather. Emily reached for it, hands shaking. She blew away the dust and opened the cover. Her breath hitched. Inside were photographs, black and white, delicate with age. A little girl no older than 7, grinning wide as she clutched the mane of a white foal. Another the girl running through the meadow, her arms wide like wings. And then one more, faded but clear, of a teenage girl standing beside a gray Mustang. Her smile, her eyes? "Nana," Emily whispered, the tears coming hard and fast. She collapsed to her knees, clutching the album to her chest, sobs shaking her body. The house had been real. The stories had been true. The horse, it had brought her home, brought her to the past she never knew, to the roots that ran deeper than she ever imagined. The Mustang stood still in the yard, watching through the broken door, its job complete. Echoes through the dust. Emily wiped her tears with the sleeve of her flannel shirt, her hand still trembling around the old leather photo album. She sat there for what felt like hours, absorbing the faces, the places, the joy in her grandmother's expressions. Every page of the album was like opening a door to a time long gone, a life she had only known through stories told by the fire on rainy nights. The air inside the house was thick, but not with fear, with memory. There was a strange kind of peace here, the kind that came when the past was no longer hidden, but invited in. She stood up slowly, legs stiff, and began to move through the rest of the house, the photo album clutched protectively in her arms. The hallway walls were cracked with water stains, but some faded wallpaper still clung on, a pattern of sunflowers now dulled by time. She traced a finger along the edge of a peeling corner, imagining her grandmother as a child running through these very halls, laughing, barefoot, free. A door at the end of the hallway drew her in. It creaked loudly as she opened it, revealing what had once been a bedroom. The bed frame was rusted, the mattress long decayed, but on the dresser sat a small wooden jewelry box. Emily's fingers hesitated before opening it. Inside, she found a delicate silver chain with a locket. Carefully, she opened the heart-shaped pendant. Inside was a tiny photo of her great-grandparents, her Nana's parents, smiling in front of a barn. She gasped softly. It was the same barn in the background of the photograph from the album, the one where the Mustang's ancestor stood. A thought struck her. Could the barn still be standing? Emily moved to the window, pushing aside the rotting curtain. Through the glass and beyond the trees, she could just make out the faded silhouette of a roof, hidden behind the overgrown brush. Heart pounding, she made her way out the front door, the Mustang still grazing nearby. It lifted its head as she stepped down from the porch, then followed her silently as if it, too, was walking through memory. The grass was waist-high, dotted with wildflowers and nettles. Twigs snapped beneath her boots, and insects buzzed lazily in the heat of the fading afternoon. When she reached the barn, she could see that time had not been kind. The red paint had peeled almost completely off, and one side of the structure sagged inward, supported only by stubborn nails and history. Still, she pushed open the door. Dust exploded into the air like a sigh. Inside, the barn smelled of hay and old wood, a scent somehow comforting. Rusty tools hung on the walls, long untouched. The floor was littered with broken planks and straw, and yet, on the far wall, something caught her eye. A name, etched into the wooden beam with a pocket knife. Rose plus Windfire, 1956. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Windfire. It had to be the name of the Mustang from the photo album. Nana had never told her the horse's name, but here it was, preserved in the wood of her childhood. Emily ran her fingers over the carving, feeling the grooves and the emotion behind each letter. She turned, eyes scanning the barn once more. Tucked into a corner beneath a tarp was a dusty wooden crate. She knelt, pulled off the covering, and opened the lid. Inside were old letters, notebooks, and sketches, pages and pages of Nana Rose's childhood. Poems about the woods, drawings of Windfire, stories about the farmhouse. One notebook in particular stood out, a leather-bound journal with the initials R.C. burned into the cover. Emily opened it. The first page was a letter. To whoever finds this, If you're reading my words, it means this house is no longer just a shell, but a home once again. I grew up here. I loved here. And I lost here. But more than anything, I lived. I leave this journal behind as a part of me, in case someday someone comes looking not just for history, but for her heart. Rose Carson. Emily's knees buckled, and she sat down hard on the barn floor. Her grandmother had left behind a piece of her soul. The journal was filled with personal entries about the days when Windfire would wait for her outside the house, about sneaking into the woods to watch the stars, about her mother teaching her to braid wildflowers into crowns. And then the later pages turned somber. The entries grew fewer, the writing shakier. I left when the house could no longer protect the memories. I never came back, but I always wondered, would someone find it and love it again? The last page was blank. Emily stared at the empty paper, tears streaming freely now. She felt as if her grandmother had spoken directly to her, across time and silence. Behind her, the Mustang stirred. It walked slowly into the barn, hooves clicking softly against the boards. It stopped beside her and lowered its head, nudging the photo album in her lap. "You're his kin, aren't you?" she whispered. "You brought me here." The Mustang blinked, calm and proud. Emily ran her fingers through its mane. "Thank you. The house that remembers." That night, the farmhouse whispered to stars. The wind slid to the broken windows and rattled the shutters like fingers tapping on memories long forgotten. Emily lay on an old blanket she had pulled from the hall closet, curled in a corner of the living room. The photo album beside her and her grandmother's journal pressed tightly to her chest. The Mustang, whom she had now begun calling Ghost, in honor of Windfire, remained outside, resting under the collapsed porch roof. He had followed her to the house, walked her back from a barn, and then stood watch as she made a small fire in the corner fireplace, using dry what she gathered and old papers from the broken drawers. Despite the eerie silence and the fragile state of the home, Emily didn't feel afraid. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Sleep came slowly, full of dreams, of Nana Rose's laughter, of wild meadows, of wind and hooves pounding through golden fields. By morning, the sky was gray and overcast, and a light drizzle tapped the roof like a slow drum. Emily woke to the sound of rain and the Mustang's occasional snort outside. She stretched, groaned, and took in the sight around her with clearer eyes. The home needed more than just cleaning. It needed saving. The roof leaked. The floor groaned with every step, and some parts of the second floor were completely unsafe. But beneath the decay, the bones of the house were strong. The house had not given up, and neither would she. Emily spent the day exploring every room she hadn't seen the day before. The kitchen was almost entirely collapsed, but she found old mason jars sealed tight and a few untouched shelves. In what had once been a study, she found another box, this one full of letters between her great-grandparents and old family friends. Some were dated as far back as 1912. She read each one, hungry for every fragment of the lives that once filled these rooms. She learned about her great-grandfather's dream to build a greenhouse next to the barn, about Rose's first time riding Windfire bareback, about her great-grandmother's talent for painting wildflowers, and her Sunday ritual of pressing violets between pages of the family Bible. Every word brought Emily closer to the heart of this forgotten place. When she finally stepped out onto the porch to breathe, Ghost was waiting. He approached slowly, his eyes soft. Emily reached out and laid a hand on his strong neck. "You knew I needed to come here," she whispered. "You brought me home." Ghost neighed softly and nudged her shoulder. She laughed, truly laughed, for the first time since Nana Rose died. The next few days blurred into a rhythm. Emily began cleaning out the rooms, removing debris, organizing what could be saved. She created a list in the back of her grandmother's journal of what needed fixing: roof repairs, new flooring, plumbing, insulation. She wasn't a contractor, but she had YouTube, a stubborn streak, and something more powerful: purpose. She slept in the barn for a few nights, fixing up a small corner with a cot, surrounded by the past, protected by memories. She found an old, still-working lantern and hung it above her, its warm glow giving comfort in the chill of night. Ghost slept nearby, often peeking his head into the open barn doors to check on her. In one of the drawers, she discovered a half-finished letter. It was addressed to E.C. Emily's heart stopped. That was her. The letter, dated 20 years earlier, was written in Nana Rose's unmistakable handwriting. My sweet Emily, one day, you might find yourself searching for something you can't name. When that day comes, I hope you find this place. This was my beginning, and it can be yours, too. If you ever feel lost, know that your roots are not in concrete and crowds. They are in trees and wind, in horses and rain. This house will wait for you. The earth remembers. So will you. She couldn't hold back the tears this time. She pressed the letter to her lips, then carefully tucked it into the photo album where it belonged. By the end of the week, Emily was no longer a visitor. She had become part of the house's rhythm. She had cleared the old living room, swept away decades of dust, and scrubbed the windows clean enough to let light pour in like honey. She patched part of the roof with a tarp, restored an old rocking chair on the porch, and even found a nearby stream where she washed the dusty linen she salvaged. But it wasn't just about the physical work. Emily was changing too. Each night, she sat by the fire and read a passage from her grandmother's journal. Each morning, she walked with Ghost through the woods, learning the land, naming the trees, listening to the birds that had made their homes in the rafters. In town, a sleepy little place just over an hour's walk away, she bought supplies and spoke to locals. Some remembered her grandmother. An old shopkeeper named Mrs. Tinsley even gave her a photograph of Rose Carson at age 17, winning a ribbon at the county fair with Wind Fire. Your grandmother was like fire and wind, Mrs. Tinsley said with a smile. She left here, but her heart never did, and she never stopped writing letters to this place. Said it lived in her blood. Emily left the store that day with a packet of nails, some paint, and a new sense of mission. She would restore the farmhouse. Not for money, not for show, but for memory, for healing, for legacy. One evening, as a summer storm rolled over the hills, Emily sat on the porch with Ghost standing beside her, both watching lightning streak the sky. You brought me here, she said to the horse, scratching behind his ear. And I think I know why. She didn't just want to stay. She belonged. And maybe, just maybe, the house had waited for her all this time. Hidden walls, silent truths. The morning mist rolled over fields like a secret, soft and silver. Emily stepped onto the porch with a mug of hot tea cradled in her hands, wearing an old wool sweater she'd found in one of the bedroom trunks. Ghost stood by the barn, tail swishing lazily, his gray coat catching the pale morning light like silver thread. The house had begun to feel alive again. After days of cleaning, patching, and sorting, the dust had given way to color, and the silence had been replaced by the soft hum of presence, of footsteps, laughter, memory, and the rustle of pages turned late at night. But Emily still felt there was more the house wanted her to see. It started with a draft. She was clearing out the upstairs hallway when she felt it, a faint breeze from nowhere. The windows were closed, and the weather was calm. She turned her head slowly and stood still. It came again, a cool whisper across her cheek, but the hallway was silent. Curious, she traced the draft back to the wall between two bedrooms. The wallpaper there looked different, older, thicker, almost like it had been applied to hide something. Her heart raced. She pressed her hand against the wall. Hollow, with a screwdriver and hammer from the old barn, Emily began to chip away at the surface. The wallpaper peeled like skin, revealing aged wood. She knocked again, yes, definitely hollow. It took 2 hours of careful work before she uncovered what she had suspected. A hidden doorway, long sealed shut. Breath catching in her throat, she pried it open. The wood groaned, then gave way. Behind the wall was a small hidden room, barely large enough for a person to stand. Dust swirled in the air like ghosts disturbed, and the only light came from a single broken vent above. Inside the room was a chest, metal, old, rusting but locked tight with chain. Emily stared at it. Her hands trembled. After retrieving a bolt cutter from town the next day, she returned to the secret room and carefully cut through the lock. The lid creaked open, and the scent of aged paper and cedarwood escaped. Inside the chest was a stack of notebooks, bundled with twine in a velvet pouch. She opened the pouch first and found a gold ring with a rose engraved on it. Her grandmother's family seal, something Nana had never spoken of. Beneath it was a folded letter addressed to Rose Carson, to be opened only if she returns. Emily unfolded the letter with trembling hands. My dearest Rose, if you're reading this, then you have returned to the place where your story began. I know why you left, and I know why you might come back. The truth of our family lies not just in our name, but in what we were entrusted to protect. There's a legacy in this land, in the wild, in the horses. The Mustangs are not just symbols of freedom. Our bloodline is tied to them, in spirit, in memory, and in something older than time. You were born with that gift, as your mother was, as your grandmother before her. Don't forget who you are. Mother, Emily's eyes widened. She looked down at the notebooks. She opened the top one. It was filled with writings on dreams, symbols, sketches of horses surrounded by strange markings. Stories of women who could hear animals' thoughts and feel the energy of the land. Her family hadn't just lived here. They had belonged to this place in a way deeper than she had imagined. The next few nights, Emily couldn't sleep. She pored over the notebooks, reading about how her great-great-grandmother used to speak to the land, how Windfire had come to Rose not just as a pet, but as a guide, a spirit tied to their family, protecting its descendants through generations. And now ghosts had come to her. It wasn't coincidence. It was a calling, driven by a new purpose. Emily threw herself into the restoration. She fixed the staircase to the attic, repaired a broken shutter on the second floor, and carefully sanded and restored the main banister. Every day she worked, she whispered to the house, I'm here. I see you. I remember. At night, she began writing in her own journal, just like Rose. She chronicled her days, her thoughts, and her dreams, which had begun to shift. She now dreamt of wild horses running across the fields, of women standing in moonlight, chanting in forgotten tongues, of a circle of fire, surrounded by hose and wind. She was beginning to believe that the gift hadn't ended with Nana Rose. One evening, while exploring a collapsed storage shed behind the barn, Emily unearthed a stone marker beneath a layer of leaves and dirt. It was carved with symbols matching those in the old notebooks. And in the center of the stone was a small, carved image of a Mustang, its head bowed, its mane blowing an invisible wind. As she brushed off the stone, Ghost appeared beside her, nuzzling the marker with his nose, then lowering his head in silence. Emily knelt and whispered, This is sacred, isn't it? You've always known. The air around her seemed to shimmer with understanding. She wasn't just rebuilding a house. She was reawakening a legacy. The legacy within. The wind spoke to her now. Emily stood barefoot in the tall grass just beyond the barn, arms outstretched, her eyes closed as the breeze wrapped around her like a whisper from the past. Each gust carried the scent of earth and rain, and something else, something older. She could feel it, not just on her skin, but deep in her bones. The notebooks had called it the echo, a gift passed down to the women of her bloodline, a connection to the land, to the wild things that lived upon it, and to the secrets the world had forgotten. Emily once thought she was just a visitor here. Now she knew she was a keeper. It began with small things. One morning, she woke to find Ghost waiting at the porch steps, his breath visible in the cool dawn air. Without a word or even a thought, she walked with him toward the edge of the property, and he led her to a small clearing where a fawn lay trapped in a fallen fence. Emily didn't panic. She crouched, murmured softly, and as she reached forward, the fawn didn't flinch. It simply stared into her eyes and waited. She untangled it, and when it stood, it pressed its nose gently to her hand before bounding into the trees. Ghost watched silently. That night, Emily wrote in her journal, I'm beginning to understand. It's not just the animals I hear, it's the land, the pulse beneath the soil, the history and the roots. Back at the farmhouse, the restoration continued, not just in wood and nails, but in soul. The townsfolk had noticed. Some came by to offer help. A carpenter named Jonah stopped by with scraps and ended up rebuilding the front steps. Mrs. Tinsley from the general store donated curtains and fresh jars of honey. People began sharing stories of Rose Carson. not as the wild girl who left, but as a woman they had quietly admired for her courage, her independence, and her strange, magical calm around animals. They said things like, she once calmed a wild dog just by humming. She healed a broken-winged bird that no vet would touch. And now they whispered the same about Emily. One evening, as the sky flared gold with sunset, Emily sat in the attic, surrounded by the last of the old trunks. She opened the final one, a small cedar chest with iron hinges. Inside, wrapped in silk, was a delicate horsehair necklace, and a folded page marked the final lesson. It read, "To walk the earth with open ears is to hear what most never will. This land breathes. Its stories are carried on hooves and winds. If you are reading this, you have heard them. You are ready, but you must choose. The world will call you back. It always does. But if you stay, you will not just live here. You will become part of it." Her breath caught in her throat. This was the moment, the choice. 2 days later, a call came through. It was from her former office in the city. Her old boss was offering her a promotion, a high-paying opportunity to return. Sleek apartment, travel perks, everything she had once chased. For a long time, Emily stared out the kitchen window of the farmhouse, the phone still in her hand. She saw a ghost in the field. She saw the rebuilt barn, the gleam of the new front steps, the wildflowers she planted outside the porch. She saw her grandmother's journal spread across the table like a map of the soul. And in that moment, her heart gave her the answer. That evening, she called back and said, "Thank you, but I found what I was really looking for." Then she hung up, walked outside barefoot, and stood beneath the stars, arms wide, heart open. And for the first time in her life, she felt whole, the oath in the oak. The days rolled by like soft pages of an old book. Life at the farmhouse had settled into a rhythm. Feeding the animals, journaling by candlelight, tending to the garden, and listening, always listening. The wind, the birds, the soil. Emily had chosen to stay, but she hadn't chosen idleness. One morning, while walking ghosts along the southern fence line, she noticed something unusual, a tall, ancient oak tree whose bark had split, revealing a carving hidden within. At first glance, it looked like an accident of nature, but upon closer inspection, she saw it clearly. It was a symbol, a circle of horses, surrounding what looked like a flame. Heart pounding, she ran back to the house and flipped through her grandmother's journals. There was the same symbol marked in the margins with one word, Oath Stone. Later that afternoon, Emily returned to the tree with a spade and lantern. Ghosts remained nearby, calm but alert. She began to dig. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, and just as the last of the roots gave way, her spade hit something hard, a stone box, no larger than a shoebox, sealed tight and wrapped in cloth that had blackened with age. Inside it lay a weathered scroll tied with horsehair string, a photograph of Rose Carson, standing with 3 other women, each wearing the same necklace Emily now wore, and a small leather pouch containing 3 silver rings, each with that same flame and horse emblem. The scroll was fragile, but still legible. To she who carries the gift, you are not alone. We were the last circle of 4, guardians of the Oath Stone, watchers of the Mustangs, keepers of the bond between land and soul. Our time ended, but the line lives on in you. Reform the circle. Restore the flame. Emily sat back on the ground, stunned. Rose hadn't been alone. She had been part of something ancient, a covenant, a sacred pact. And now it was Emily's turn. But what was a flame? And who were the others? She began researching in town. She visited the archives, spoke with elders, and eventually tracked down descendants of the women in the photo. One lived 2 counties away. Another had passed, but her daughter was a veterinarian known for a strange, intuitive bond with horses. The third was a mystery. No records, no trail. Emily wrote them letters, explaining what she'd found. She wasn't sure they'd believe her. But within a week, 2 responses came back. One said, "My grandmother spoke of Rose. She said, one day the land would call again. I think it just did." The other said, "I had a dream about a white horse. And then your letter arrived. I'm listening. That weekend, Emily hosted them at the farmhouse. Under the oak tree, the three women stood in a circle, each wearing one of the silver rings. The air shimmered. Ghost pawed at the ground once, then stood perfectly still. Together, the women read the old oath from the scroll. By earth and wind, by hoof and flame, we stand to guard an honor's name. Where stories sleep, we will awake. The bond we keep, we shall not break. As they finished, a gust of wind spiraled through the trees, and the horses in the far pasture all lifted their heads at once. The land had heard them, and it had answered. That night, Emily dreamed of Rose for the first time. She stood beside the old tree, hand on its bark, and smiled. You've done well, child, but the story is not over yet. The fire's been lit, now you must protect it. Emily awoke with tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but purpose. Shadows beneath the soil. The following week brought peace, but it was the kind that whispered of a coming storm. Emily and the new circle, Lila, the vet with the quiet eyes, and Marin, the herbalist with callous hands, began tending to the land together. They mapped old trails, repaired forgotten fences, and planted new herbs in the garden. Each evening they gathered under the oak to meditate, sharing dreams and visions. But the signs had started to shift. It began subtly. The air grew heavy before dusk. Birds stopped singing earlier than usual. Ghosts became restless at night, often standing at the edge of the woods, ears pinned back, staring into the darkness. Then came the footprints. One morning, Emily found them by the barn, large, clawed prints. Not bear, not coyote. Something else. Something wrong. Marin traced the pattern in the dirt and whispered, "These don't belong." Lila nodded slowly. "This is what my grandmother warned about. She called it the hollowing, a tearing between the wild and the withered, a force that rises when the balance breaks." Emily's skin chilled. "Do you think it's because we reformed the circle?" "No," Marin replied. "I think it's because someone doesn't want us to." They returned to the scroll and Rose's journals, searching for answers. One entry stood out, dated July 14th, 1963. "The seal grows weak. The land grows silent. I feel them pressing in, the hollow ones, shadows with no soul. If I fall, the circle must not break. The oath stone must never be moved." Emily looked up. "What if we disturbed something when we found the box?" Marin answered grimly, "Then we may have opened a door that was never meant to be touched again." That night, the dream returned, but this time, Rose didn't appear. Instead, Emily stood in the woods, surrounded by fog. In the distance, eyes glowed red. A voice echoed, not from around her, but from within her. "You are not the first to rise. You will not be the first to fall. Leave the land. Break the circle, or we will hollow you too." She woke gasping, the room ice cold, her breath visible in the air. Outside, the oak tree groaned, not in the wind, but like something pressing against it from beneath. In the following days, animals began disappearing. Chickens, goats, even a deer carcass found by the creek, untouched by predators, but its eyes were gone. Emily, Lila, and Marin lit protective wards around the farmhouse. They used salt, old herbs, and chants passed down in whispers. But still, the darkness crept closer. Then one afternoon, as Emily knelt in the garden, she felt it, a tremor beneath her hands, a shiver in the earth, and then the oak tree split open. Its center rotted from within. Black sap oozed out, and a low, guttural growl escaped the hollow. Ghosts bolted into the field, neighing in alarm. Something had awakened, and it was not of this world. That night, the three women gathered in the attic, lit candles, and placed their rings in a triangle over the old scroll. Marin whispered, "If the hollow ones are rising, we have to restore the full bond, not just the circle, the flame." Emily clenched her jaw. "Then we find the fourth." Lila's voice was barely above a whisper. "But what if she doesn't want to be found?" Emily's eyes were steel. "Then we make her remember who she is." The forgotten flame. 3 days had passed since the oak tree cracked open. The land was quieter now, unnaturally so. Even the wind felt afraid to move. And Emily knew they didn't have much time. The hollow ones are gathering, Marin said grimly as she brewed a protective tonic. The balance is tilting. But we're not whole, Lila added, laying out the map. We're 3. The circle was always meant to be 4. Emily nodded. Her grandmother's last words echoed in her mind. Reform the circle. Restore the flame. The flame, they now believed, was not a fire, but a person, the 4th guardian. The photograph in the scroll box was their only clue. Emily studied it again. For young women, arms linked. Rose, Marin's grandmother, Lila's great-aunt, and the 4th, a girl with fierce eyes and a slight smile, standing slightly apart, as if she knew something the others didn't. Marin said, no one ever mentioned her name, but Lila stepped forward, holding an old veterinary newsletter passed down in her family. She signed this. 20 years ago, her name was Evelyn Cade. Emily's heart quickened. Do we know where she is? Lila shook her head. Disappeared in the 90s. Some say she went into the woods and never came back. Emily's hand trembled. Then that's where we start looking. The woods were thick, ancient, and pulsing with unease. They followed a trail once used by trappers, now swallowed by time. Emily led the way, Ghost by her side, the Mustang more alert than ever, nostrils flaring. They searched for hours. The deeper they went, the heavier the air grew. Then, just past a narrow stream, they saw it, a cabin, old, overgrown, hidden beneath the embrace of twisted trees, as if the forest was trying to erase it. Smoke rose from a crooked chimney. Someone was inside. Emily stepped forward and knocked gently. No answer. She pushed the door open, and there, sitting by a fire, was a woman with silver hair tied in a braid, back straight, hands resting on a worn journal. Her eyes met Emily's. Cold, sharp, knowing. Took you long enough, she said. I felt the oak crack. I knew the seal was broken. You're Evelyn Cade, Emily said softly. The woman didn't blink. And you're Rose's blood. I see her in your eyes. Emily hesitated. We need you. The circle. I know why you've come, and I'll tell you the truth. Evelyn stood slowly. The circle wasn't broken by time. It was broken by betrayal. The fire cracked loudly, as if echoing her pain. Evelyn walked to a locked trunk and opened it. Inside were old pages, torn letters, and a burnt ring. The hollow ones came before. We defeated them. But someone let them in. One of us. Not Rose. Not me. One of the others. Marin's eyes widened. Are you saying one of our grandmothers? I'm saying, Evelyn interrupted, if you don't find a traitor, this time, the land won't survive. Outside, the wind howled. Trees shuddered. The shadows between the trunks moved, alive. Evelyn stepped outside and stared into the dark. If I join you, I must lead. I won't follow anyone's orders. Emily looked at her, steady and calm. Then don't follow. Stand with us. Evelyn paused, then slipped the 4th ring onto her finger. The air snapped like something falling into place. The circle was complete, but before they could return to the farmhouse, a shriek cut through the woods. High, ragged, inhuman. A shape moved between the trees. Not quite man, not quite beast. It had eyes like coal and a mouth sewn shut. Ghost reared back. Lila whispered, they've come for the flame. Emily drew a deep breath. Then we burn brighter.